Okay, welcome to lecture 6.5. Okay, now I'm going to discuss my paper with Steve Levitt and Jim Snyder. God, I can't remember the name of it. It was in the American Political Science Review, I think 1996. And it's something like using adjusted interest group scores, something like that, to make comparisons across time and chambers. I think that's it. Here's here's the puzzle. I want to begin with sort of a brain teaser. So, if you're a student of politics, especially kind of history now, uh, in 1974, Watergate happened, and Nixon resigned like in August of 1974. And then in the November elections, so those are midterm elections, the Republicans just took a beating. The Democrats gained something like, it might have been like 60 seats. I'm almost certain over 50. And so all of a sudden, the new House was much more liberal than the old House. The House in 1975 was much more liberal than the House in 1974. Um, in not only that, there are a bigger proportion are Democrats, but not only that, there was a notion that they called Watergate babies, and those were the freshmen who were elected in 1975. The Democrats were elected, and a lot of them were very liberal. They ran on a very liberal program, like anti-Nixon, and said, I'm going to be, much more liberal than even the other Democrats are that are currently in the House. So not only are there more Democrats, the Democrats who are there are probably more liberal than the old Democrats. Okay, so that's kind of the anecdotal evidence. That's what a lot of people believe. Despite that, if you look at interest group scores, okay, now let me give you some background. So in political science, there's a number of interest groups, and there's something like at least 200 or 300, maybe 1,000 of them, that interest groups that every year will select so many roll call votes and then give every member of Congress a report card on if they voted the correct way, or correct is in quotation marks. And there's so many groups. The one that started it all was the Americans for Democratic Action, and they called themselves a liberal interest group. They started in 1947. They started giving scores, and everyone would get a score. So the percent of time on these 20 key votes or 10 key votes, whatever the ADA picked, that the legislator voted the correct way, or correct means liberal with the ADA, and the ADA would give them a score from 0 to 100, saying how often they voted. So all of a sudden, there's a ton of other ones. To this day, there's not only like a score from the Farmers Alliance. I mean, it's so specific. There's something from like the Wheat Growers Alliance. So you name it. There's an interest group that gives some sort of score. One of the first ones after the Americans for Democratic Action was the Americans for Constitutional Action. And this was a conservative interest group, and they started giving scores. Now, here's what happened. So, a kind of paradox occurred from 1974 to 1975. Even though 75, there are many more Democrats than 74, and the Democrats were probably more liberal in 75 than the Democrats in 74 were. So, everything should be more liberal. Despite that, the average ACA score of the House went up from 1974 to 1975. Okay, that's crazy. Higher scores are supposed to mean more conservative. And so just looking at the scores, it looks like, the House became more conservative. Okay, so let's try to explain why that might have happened, why you could see the scores that way when really maybe the House did not become more conservative. Now, here's what I think happened. Okay. So, let's say these are the members. Let's say there's 1, six members. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And these are the ideal points of members in, this is 1974. And let's say this is the liberal side of the axis, and this is the conservative. Darn, I should have, yeah, I think it'll be fine. I should have made conservative on the right. I should have made conservative higher score. I think it'll be fine. Now, let's say that there's only 6 members in the House, these 6. And let's suppose that I'm going to put an asterisk as the cut point. Okay, so the midpoint of 2 bill locations, so the yay and the nay vote. Let's say on roll call 1 that the ACA picked, it's there. Roll call 2, it's here. And roll call 3, it's here. Okay. What would the scores look like? Okay. So these 2 members are, okay, they're on the conservative side of each cut point. So there's this cut point 1, there's say the conservative votes the yay, that alternative would have to be here, the nay alternative would have to be on that side. Whatever the conservatives, these 2 legislators voted on the conservative side. This legislator would have voted on the liberal side on roll call 1, but voted on the conservative side on 2 and 3. Okay, so what that would mean is that, and by the way, this legislator would have voted on the conservative side of all 3 roll call votes. So that would have meant he or she would have gotten 100. Same thing for that legislator. That legislator would have gotten 66.7. That one would have gotten 33.3, and that one is 0. That one is 0. Okay. Now, let's suppose that in 1975, that legislator and that legislator lose office. They lose re-election. Okay. Meanwhile, those 4 get reelected, and then 2 new members are even more liberal than the old members. Okay. So I've tried to make this so that, that legislator stays the same ideology as that legislator stays the same ideology from 74 to 75. Okay, so that is what the ideal points look like. So everyone has the mix of ideal points is definitely more liberal in 1975 than 1974. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift the cut points in the liberal direction, and even more so, I'm going to shift them even more than the ideal points shifted. Okay, here's what I mean by that. So let's say for the next, for 75, roll call 1, call it C1 prime. Roll call 2 is here. What would that do? Wait, did I do that right? No. I'm going to really shift them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have roll call 1 there, roll call 2 here, and roll call 3 here. Okay. So notice I've shifted, okay, the cut points really a lot in the liberal direction. If that happened, what would be the scores of in 1975? Well, this member and that member and that member, they're always on the conservative side on all 3 cut points. So this one will get 100, so would that one, so would that one. that person would get a 66.7, that person 33.3, and that person is 0. Before we had 2 persons with 0, 2 with 100. Now we got 3 with 100, 1 with 0. And remember, higher scores mean more conservative, according to the Americans for Constitutional Action. So this, I think, is what happened, that really from 1974 to 75, the ideal points shifted in the liberal direction. However, the cut points that the ACA chose, okay, the roll call votes that they chose had cut points that were even more in the liberal direction than they were from the roll call votes they chose in 1974. Because of that, it made the scores actually go up, made them look even more conservative than they were in 1974. Okay, so that's where I'm going. That's where I'm going. So the paper that Steve Levitt, Jim Snyder, and I wrote, we said, look, any of these interest group scores, it's not clear you can use them to make intertemporal comparisons because of this, because the cut points are changing from year to year. And what that means is the scales are changing. So the scales are shifting left and right from year to year. And for that reason, it makes it problematic to make comparisons over time. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to use a technique, come up with some assumptions, use those assumptions to try to adjust the scales. So we'll be able to convert the scales from, say, 1974 to 75, and then once we adjust the scales, then we can make comparisons, okay? So that's where I'm going. I'll stop there. So that's the intro, okay? Next segment, I'll go into some of the details about what we'll do to shift these scales. Okay, and I will see you there.